Disassemble and service the turbocharger every 4,800 hours. Prepare these replacement parts before servicing. Prepare the tools for disassembly in advance. Prepare the general tools shown in the list. Prepare these accessory tools for the turbocharger. Prepare these tools for making the necessary measurements. Prepare these special tools. Click the Order Form button in the menu to order and prepare special tools in advance. Now let's look at the disassembly procedures. Before starting disassembly, put on a helmet, safety glasses, earplugs, safety gloves, and shoes. Before removing the turbocharger, cool the engine for about 4 hours after stopping operation. First, measure the exhaust flexible joint. Measure the installation size H and the displacement distance at a right angle to the shaft X at the 4 positions shown. Check that the measured values are almost identical to those shown on the record sheet and enter your values on the sheet. Remove the turbocharger from the engine. The cover is best removed too, to make it easier to remove the turbocharger. Remove the bolt at the exhaust inlet, the bolt at the exhaust outlet, and the installation foot bolt. In the case of the RH133, remove the blower casing set bolt. The joint bolts of the turbocharger and the exhaust output pipe should not be loosened yet. Install the lifting fixture and remove the turbocharger. Lift with care. Now let's look at how to disassemble the turbocharger. The installation angle of the turbocharger casing depends on the engine assembly. Mark the alignment position for the compressor and turbine casings before starting disassembly. Stand the turbocharger on its turbine side. Remove the silencer. Take care not to damage the steel mesh while removing the silencer. Next is removal of the compressor housing. Take care not to damage the compressor impeller while removing the housing. Place the turbocharger on its side and measure the turbine rotor clearance. To measure the thrust clearance, push the compressor impeller to the turbine side and set the dial to 0. Then push the impeller to the compressor side and read the dial. This value is the thrust clearance. To measure the radial clearance, set the dial to 0 at the end of the compressor impeller. Then press the compressor side of the turbine rotor upwards and read the dial again. Next, press the compressor side downwards and read the new value. The total of the upper and lower values is the radial clearance. Make this measurement about 3 times and take the average values. Check that the average is within the range allowed in the table. Next, measure the exhaust casing clearance. Measure the clearance at 4 positions and check that the measured values exceed the values listed in the table. If the clearance is smaller, the turbine wheel will come in contact with the casing. After measurement, enter the results on the record sheet. In the case of inspections every 2400 hours, an overhaul is needed if any of the 4 measured clearances fails to correspond to the listed clearance. Click Disassembly 2. If all values are within the allowable range, click Assembly 2. Install the turbine rotor fastening tool onto the gas outlet flange of the turbine housing. For more convenient reassembly of the compressor impeller, mark the alignment position on the threads and nut. Remove the shaft end nut. This has a left-hand thread, so turn it clockwise for removal. Pull out the compressor impeller. If it is hard to remove, heat the impeller with a dryer or other device before removal. Do not knock the shaft end with a hammer or other tool. After making an alignment mark, remove the hexagonal bolts fastening the sealing plate. Use the 2 bolts just removed as puller bolts to remove the sealing plate and oil thrower together. Remove the anti-side thrust collar. Use the 2 hexagonal bolts which fasten the sealing plate as puller bolts to remove the thrust bearing. Remove the distance piece. Remove the direct side thrust collar. Remove the O-ring. Next is removal of the turbine housing. First, remove the hexagonal bolts. Apply penetrant to the spigot joint of the turbine housing. A bolt interferes at the base of the installation foot. Turn the housing to remove it. These bolts are heat resistant. Separate them from the others. Place the turbocharger upside down to remove the turbine housing. Place the turbocharger on a proper mount so that the end of the rotor shaft does not strike the top of the table. Put a wire through the turbine rotor fastener and remove the turbine housing with a crane. If it is hard to remove, knock around the perimeter of the housing lightly with a plastic hammer. Take care not to damage the turbine wheel. Remove the turbine rotor. Take care not to damage the turbine shaft. In the case of the RH-133, remove the metal sealing gasket. Remove the heat insulator. If it is hard to remove, knock it lightly with a plastic hammer. Now remove the turbine side seal ring from the turbine rotor with the seal ring pliers. Be sure to replace the seal ring upon reassembly. Remove the oil thrower from the compressor impeller side sealing plate that was removed just a moment ago. Remove the compressor side seal ring from the oil thrower with the seal ring pliers. Next is disassembly of the bearing. First, the turbine side. Remove the snap ring with the snap ring pliers. Remove the floating bearing. Remove the compressor side snap ring and the floating bearing. This completes disassembly of the turbocharger.